we can see. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are live on Facebook as well. So
Okay. So we'll get started.
okay.
Here we go.
All right.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We're ready to start. Apologies for all the technology. If we were in person, it would be so different. But so this is part 3 of the Brown Identity Plática, where we've been historically, where we are now, and where we're going, right? Our future. It's very important that we name ourselves, that we have the self-autonomy and the self-determination to name ourselves and not be named by others. And to do that, we have to know a little bit about who we are. What is behind the terms? What's the history of the terms that are being used that are labels that are put on us, right? In part 1, we talked about, Latino, Hispanic, and where those really originated from, and came to the conclusions that they did not fit who we are, and that for many political reasons and those who hold power choose names for us according to what fits what they want to do. So then the second panel, part 2, we talked more about race. So I'm gonna want hopefully all 3 of us to talk about really identifying real quickly, what is race? What's the difference between race, ethnicity, and culture? So that way when we talk about these terms, we know what we're talking about and which thing we're focusing on. So we have another set of questions for today, but first to introduce, Kiawi is the program coordinator. Is that correct? I'm going off my memory. For Academia Cuatli, which is a language and culture revitalization Saturday school in collaboration with the Mexican American Cultural Center and UT and the community and the school district. So he is that program coordinator, and he's also been practicing medicine for a lot of years and has gone very deep into really understanding and studying our people, exactly what we're talking about, where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Also, he's works with Brown Continent is another organization. You can find them on Facebook, on Instagram, that really focus on aligning our identity, our racial identity with our political strengths and really identifying who we are as a people. Is there anything I left out, Kiawi, that you want me to include in your intro?
No, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Manuel Samaripa with the Institute of Chicano Psychology. And there he gives professional development. He gives guidance to organizations who want to function in a more culturally competent way. He teaches therapists and mental health, behavioral health workers and practitioners, clinicians, and also gives community pláticas around topics like identity and trauma and just things that affect our lives towards our wellness, our well-being. And I'm Jessica Tlazotiani Samaripa, and I have been grassroots organizing in Austin for, let's see, my second child is 19, so for 19 years. And started with Latina Mommy, Immigrants' Rights Council, and a lot of other organizations along the way. Also, Alma de Mujer was on the council there. And Academia Cuatli, Manuel and I also were part of the beginning group, Nuestro Grupo, who started Academia Cuatli. And I also am a moon dancer under the Órdenes de Abuela Rosa Tupina Yautanau Cuatli. And also Manuel and I are danzantes under her with Danza Mexica Xochipilli. So Tasokamati, everybody, for spending your Saturday morning with us as we go into identity, right? All the different parts about it and why it matters. So to dive right in and begin with the first question that we had, we compiled questions from the last few times. So to start off with, there's a lot going on and being talked about with immigrants, right? Our people as immigrants, and that means moving to another land to live. So, Manuel, I know you had a better definition for immigrant, and then there's the word migrant, right? So there's a lot politically and internally we've been taught to believe that we're a lesser people, right? When we had to, we had to be immigrants, like foreigners to this country, move to this foreign country and take, right? That's the way the perspective is put out there. So we wanted to talk more about our people and the term, what is around the term migrant or immigrant? Which one of you would like to start with that one?
Dr. Samarripa, maybe would like to.
Okay, you want to go?
Okay.
I don't know if he wants to.
Thank you.
You can throw the ball back.
Thank you, hermano. Yeah, I think when I think of those terms, migrant and immigrant, I think for me, the term immigrant is just really about political constructs in our current day, the way nations construct their borders and decide who is, going to be part of a particular political structure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you really quick, but does anybody else hear the echo? Is he echoing or is that just to me? I'm going to look in the chat to see if anyone else is hearing. Yeah, do you hear an echo?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It was just sounding
I
good,
don't
but then
know.
it started echoing.
Yeah, maybe there's something you can do.
I think it's because you're on the phone and on the computer. You're on Instagram and on the computer.
Okay. All right. So then, oh, that's what it is. All right. So let me mute. Some people are hearing an echo sometimes. All right. Go ahead and continue. We'll see if we can just move through.
Okay. Let's see how it goes. So the term migrant, I think is more appropriate in terms of, it describes movement from one place to another. And so really, in fact, that's where we are. We're just moving across from one place to another for a lot of current economic reasons, but we're still moving to different places along our land, right, along our continent, is the way I've come to see it. But I also realize that a lot of people in our community have pride in that identity of immigrant. Like, I am the son or daughter of an immigrant. I have come here and I've made it. America is the land of immigrants. And so it's very deep within our conversation, within our sense of who we are as a community. And, the discussion usually, or the debate, is whether people have a negative view of immigrant or a positive view of the word immigrant. Right. And so we always try to have that pride and that history lesson, like, we aren't the most recent immigrants. We have been here, before the European immigrants. So I'm saying all that because I think that's the way a lot of our community thinks of that. And I remember, having that sense as well. But really, I've come to realize that, anytime we use the term immigrant, it's purely a political definition, still decided by men and women who are deciding who holds what kind of power based on what country or political state they're trying to define. So I think, really in actuality, the idea of seeing ourselves as, if we want to, as migrants makes more sense Because in fact, again, a migrant, there is no legal definition of the word migrant as there is with immigrant, right? There's like legal. There's no official formal legal definition of migrant. You know, people, animals, you know, migrate and move based on, here's the real fundamental piece is people migrate based on where they can eat better, where they can live better. They follow the movement of the animals or the crops. And in fact, that's what our current migrant brothers and sisters are doing. If they cross that political line from what's seen as one country to another, they're going where the life might be better for them, right? Where they are trying to get better food, better jobs. But it's a very natural movement. So I think that's all. I think I'll stop there. Hermano?
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, hermana. I changed the background here to a meme that we created. Let me see if I can move out of the way there. Okay, we have a European Spaniard, and then we have the current police or ICE taking a gentleman away, and to show that historically nothing has changed. So the fact that we allow ourselves to be called immigrants, I think first of all, the war hasn't stopped, and that's what this image implies. That when Europeans invaded our continent, we're still in that war since 1492 when they first set foot here on this side of the world. Right now, it's their descendants who continue to find ways to maintain a grip on our land and resources. And we're seeing the fights repeatedly all the way from Canada to Ecuador and Argentina and Central America and Mexico, everywhere. Our people are fighting or resisting them in one form or another to defend their land, whatever it is, where they're at this point in time. So in that sense, we need to realize that we are at war. We're in the middle of a war, a 500+ year war, and we're the survivors of ongoing genocide because that hasn't stopped either. Most people don't know this, and they're seeing a lot of the things that happen with Native people as extra secular, in other words, like outside of their realm, because they don't know who they are. They don't know that they're Native American, you know, and and they see that as like isolated incidences, and we fail to put that together in a chain of events that began in 1492. So if you're at war and people are constantly finding ways to either destroy you, especially through identity, so you do not make that connection and bring yourself into the fight or the resistance, they will find ways to label you and mislabel you intentionally. And that's why we urge people to use the race card, because those are the tools that we have at hand. And that's what millions of our people know at the moment, and call ourselves Native American, because if you aren't Black, if you're not Asian, if you are not white or European, then that only leaves one other option, Native American. You know, for all intents and purposes, we have to be strategic and stay away from the word immigrant at all costs, even migrant for now, and just say, yes, I'm Native American, but our oral traditions, our stories, our people's stories of their origins, or wherever, it's always been about migrating on this land, you know. And I don't want to get into the whole theory, which is a theory about the Bering Strait, because that's been used against us too, you know, to level to try and like level the playing field, you know, where we hear these same people who say in the face of Black people, when they say Black Lives Matter, they say all lives matter. So now they're saying we're all immigrants, you know. And where does that put us? It definitely doesn't put us in the proper perspective of being Native Americans on their continent, you know. So we see the war here, and how it's an informational war, how they call us migrants, immigrants, illegal aliens. They call us foreigners and intruders. but all that is erased once we embrace our racial identity as Native Americans, because there's no way Native Americans can be illegal on their continent. They can't be immigrants on their continent. So then this is thrown at us so that we fail or to recognize the Europeans as immigrants, as invaders occupying our continent. You know, we have to call it for what it is. You know, we're not here to like, I'm not here to mince words and try to be polite or nice about it. You know, they're sitting on our continent, occupying our homelands, and their corporations are sucking up all the resources and tearing up the land and displacing and they continue to displace our people and any given part of this continent, you know, to get to the resources that are under the ground. So yeah, I mean, I urge that we, you know, we do suggest very strongly that we stay away from the word immigrant. When we put it into context, there's no way that we can be immigrants, you know, and we have to realize that it was Europeans who created these apartheid borders, you know, to create countries on our homeland. You know, beneath all those illusions, it's still our continent, our land. You know, so once they created these borders, once we jumped over, or once we continued to migrate on our continent, you know, they started, you know, an information, you know, propaganda campaign to call us illegal, to call us trespassers, foreigners, you know, and yes, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Dr. Samaripa, because a lot of our people sadly, you know, embrace that as part of a hard-fought struggle and incorporate it into their being or their identity, that I come from a family of immigrants. We're proud, whether they came here according to the invaders as legally or illegally on the Europeans' terms. Many are proud of that. And they said, yeah, we started from nothing, you know, and they embraced the so-called American dream. It's just a form of survival, but we need to, you know, just stop saying that we're immigrants, because we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We have nothing to benefit from calling ourselves immigrant, because then we're just going to easily be stamped as, again, illegal aliens, came here illegally, you're not from here, you don't belong here. And we buy into it when we eat it up, hook, line, and sinker, you know, and we remain in the same position.
Okay. Plus, at the end, I think your mute is on. I'm not sure we can
Yeah,
hear
okay,
you.
I was having trouble unmuting. Thank you for that. You know, y'all are bringing up, like always, so many things that make us really, like people are saying now, decolonize our thinking and really make shifts about what we believe about the history that we've been taught and the way we think about the world in which we live now. And then to understand how that's related to us as individuals, to my family, to the way I'm raising my kids, right? To the way that I'm interacting with my world, or the way to not making invisible the way that world is interacting with us that we don't realize or see. And so to know that what y'all are saying is fact. It's not revisionist history. It's not just a perspective. You can look at the history and see that these things have happened, are happening. And but it's true, there's some way. I know with the Institute of Chicana Psychology, we really work to make the invisible visible. So it's crazy how a lot of these things that are happening, like the contemporary genocide and all these things, feels invisible. It feels like an aside, right? And what methods have been put in place for oppression and internalized oppression, to where we think that that's separate from us. These are our ancestors. These are our siblings. These are our, you know, sisters, brothers, siblings that are going through these things, right? But somehow there's mechanisms in place where we separate ourselves from it. So there's a lot of internal work to do when we talk about our identity, and to understand how important it is to know who we are, name ourselves, not just in name, but in really understanding who we are. There are political reasons, there are emotional reasons, there are reasons for our children, intergenerational trauma, all kinds of connections, why it matters, what we understand about what's happening and who we are. So thank y'all for that. Now let's move on to the next question. We always have so much to talk about. So we're going to talk about the word mestizo. What does mestizo mean? And let's talk about what that means in all of these different ways that affect who we are. Dr. Samaripa, you want to go next?
I'll ask my hermano, would you mind going first on this one? Yeah, I think you're, oh yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I don't want to pick up background noise and throw anything off, but yeah, I changed the image for this. I have a set of images that I used for some presentations, and the background image comes from a painting by Diego Rivera, which shows the Spanish invasion, the European invasion of Central Mexico. The word mestizo was created by the Spaniards, you know, and I mean, it's the term itself, I mean, has become a false racial identity, you know, among a lot of us, and especially in Mexico. And even in South America, I have friends from Peru who consider themselves mestizo, and you look at them and they're just flat out brown native people, you know. So it's been tattooed into our psyche, and it took 500 plus years to get this into, you know, into our minds and make us believe it. The word just means mixed. And interestingly enough, the French have the same category up in Canada and the northeastern US. We can tell where the French invaded by the French surnames among native people over there. And they created a term, phonetically it looks like it's métis, but it's pronounced métis, which means mixed or mixed blood. You know, so a mestizo is someone of European and Native American descent. And the problem here is we've been programmed to think that mixed blood means mixed race, and that this new race was created when it's not true. The majority of African Americans, and I say African American, referring to the people who are the Black Africans, who are the descendants of the people who were stolen from their homeland and brought here on boats to be enslaved. Many of them have white blood mixed in through a colonial admixture, and that's a gentle euphemism. You know, colonial admixture, we can translate that into rape. You know, and you don't hear them talking about mixed blood at all. They still say they're African American or African or they're Black. No mixed talk there. You know, what's the problem with us? You know, and another part is like you have extremely white passing natives who are recognized by the federal government. And that doesn't mean anything. Federal recognition does not mean anything. You know, I think we've already covered that, which is a strategy imposed by Europeans to erase millions of people from their native identity. But there are tribes or nations in the US that look like white people. You know, there's many of them out there. They don't have a problem saying that they're Native American or that they're American Indian. You know, no mixed talk from them. But when I look at people that look like us, they're the first people to say, oh, I'm mestizo, I'm mixed blood. I'm half this or half that. And we have to realize, mathematically speaking, the amount of Spaniards that came to this continent is only a fraction of the millions and millions of Native Americans that were here. How would it be? I mean, if we apply logic to this, did every single male Spaniard rape every single Native American woman to create a so-called half-blood or mestizo child? No. I mean, if you go to Mexico and you look at people, you're going to see Native American people, you know, and Mexicans, so-called Mexicans, have the largest concentration of Native American DNA, you know, but even they call themselves mestizo. And this is the damage, you know, the mental damage created by the propaganda that was imposed by the caste system. So the Spaniards created a caste system where they had about it was under 20 designations, but it was near anywhere from 14 or 12 to 19 designations. And you had the Peninsulares or the Iberians, the ones that came straight from Spain. And then you had the, I don't know if it was the Castizo, but then the ones who were born here, that are from direct European ancestry. And then you have the mestizos, the offspring of children who were born from, the offspring of European and Native American ancestry. And interestingly enough, Jack Forbes wrote an article, and I wrote it down, and it was shared with me by the brothers over at Indigenous Podcast on YouTube. I would check them out too. They have a really good podcast about identity. But Jack Forbes is a Native American author and writer, and he said that in his article called Eurocentric Concepts Harm Native People, and What Do We Mean by America and American? He said in 1563, the Spanish crown prohibited, quote, Negroes, mulattoes, or mestizos, quote, from living in American or indigenous communities, even though they were almost always half American, only making an exception for those actually born into the community. So there was a plan, there was a strategy being imposed on our ancestors to keep them away from returning to their ancestral communities, and erase them completely. So it was an early form of like what the residential school was achieving in the 1800s and the Indian boarding schools as well here up in the north. So the fact that we have mixed blood, or whoever does and who doesn't, we're free to claim who we want. But if we're going to claim Native American, we need to be bold and say we're Native American. It's a matter that comes into our heart, and we need to think again about the war that we're in. If we're going to call ourselves mixed, oh, I'm mixed, I'm mestizo, I'm mestiza, again, we're going to subject ourselves to further damage, to where people are going to use that against us to say, oh, you're mixed, you're no longer Native American. There's no reason for you to be claiming this as your homeland, because part of your homeland is in Europe now. You're also European, remember. And I don't know how many of you have come across that, but that's been used widely on social media. I've seen that even in person, where they say, are you an authentic Native American? It's like, aren't you Spanish? Aren't you Hispanic? I mean, it's you. I mean, they use it against us. And that's what it was used for, to erase us, to prevent us from going back. In 1563, the viceroy of New Spain made that decree to keep people from going back to their ancestral communities. This was intentional, and it's still intentional. And the United States government, on the census forms or any other form, they're always putting that there. Are you of Hispanic origin? Are you Latino? Are you Chicano? Are you Mexican? Anything to keep you from checking the box or declaring that you're Native American. They create these obstacles on purpose, to confuse us. We have to remember they came to confuse and attack. That was a line I got from, I think it was a John Trudell poem or from his documentary. And they have millions of our people in a state of confusion where everybody's fighting to come up with the correct term to address this issue. And I mean, it has us in a competition to see who can flex their intellectual muscles. No, it's because we're this, we're that, or I read it in this book, and authors are publishing books with the same propaganda, paying homage to this, this mental manipulation and indoctrination that the Europeans created to confuse us intentionally. And it's all, we have to remember in this war, it's about them maintaining control and domination of our continent, our home, our resources, and eventually our minds. They need us to be, docile and obedient. They don't want they want good Hispanics, they want good mestizos that are accepting their place in a form of in an illusion of colonial peace, where we can all get along. So it's up to us to draw the line, and ask ourselves, who are we really? And it shouldn't be that hard for many of us that look in the mirror and like, oh, I'm not, what race am I? And that's it.
Thank you for that. So again, people, these get uploaded to YouTube, so you can rewatch all three of them and really pause it and go through your thinking process to undo some of these things that have happened to confuse and attack, right? And yeah, you'll still see that. I'm glad you read that article, because what was that, 1567 or 63? But here
63.
you'll still see, yeah, you'll still see our parents and our tios, people still just not acknowledging our native practices that their parents did, or that they do, or that we do, and just really trying to separate us and divorce us from that identity. So once these mechanisms were put in place back then and implemented, then we start doing it to ourselves. I know we covered that before. And here, we can be real strong. When we believe something, we're like, I don't need to hear any of that BS about what we are racially. Like, that's ridiculous. I'm Mexican. Well, that's why we have the three parts of this to cover. Okay, yes, you are Mexican. You can be proud of that culturally. We're going to cover that in a little bit. So, Dr. Samaripa, if you can speak to that, but then also I think we need to quickly identify again, I don't think we did actually, go over the difference real quickly between race, ethnicity, and culture, because people may be part of that confusion, like sliding the terms between those things, and then it can be more confusing. So do you want to cover that real quickly, or talk about mestizo first, or okay?
Yeah, well, let me offer some distinctions between the terms, which by no means is kind of the this is it completely, but just the best way that I understand it. Excuse me. So race, of course, refers to, I think, like Yaoi was saying, you look in the mirror and you can see your phenotype, your skin, your eye color. These are the physiological ideas that people used to think separated humans in terms of different species, right? Which was there was much more, but that was that whole way of classifying the races, where the white skinned people were on top and other people could be enslaved or mattered less. But we know that that everyone migrated, of course, from darker skin, or evolved from darker skin to lighter skin. So we know that darker skin people are the oldest living humans. We already know that as humans evolve, our skin can go from dark to light, but it can't go from light to dark. So the lighter you are, the whiter you are, the more recent that evolution is in the history of humanity. So that is kind of the very overview. There's much more, but I know we're just trying to just have some rough identifications. And
so real quickly, aren't there only 4 classifications for race? Is that still true? Is that still correct? Where it's black, or what are they?
Yeah, it's the black, and then Asian, of Asian descent, and then native, the so-called red, and white. Right, those are the kind of the 4.
Okay.
Those are the 4
So
racial
that's a
classifications.
very simple way to think about, right? Like, okay, I know Kiawi Brown Huntington always says that if you're not black, if you're not white, if you're not Asian, then you're native.
Right. Okay. Exactly.
So then you were going to move into ethnicity?
Ethnicity is a little more complicated. It's more of a peoplehood. So, for example, Germany was composed, what now is called politically Germany, was composed of Germanic, what we call Germanic tribes, the barbers, the barbarians, all those different ones. So they're racially white, but they have a sense of, peoplehood. I like to point out that if you look at some of the countries' names in Western Europe, they still bear the names of what was primarily the ethnic tribes of those lands, right? Like Germanic tribes. Well, that area became Germany, right? And so that's more of a peoplehood. And then culture is those everyday, shared beliefs, values, customs, perspectives that are passed down over generations, but they're shared. A lot of when I've had discussions like this, some people say, well, I'm my own culture. I don't follow, my people. You can't be your own culture. That's just being an individual. Culture by definition is shared. It's a shared sense of values and ways of being and maybe language. So they overlap, but, and we can just talk about the details and some of the problems in each of those things I just said, but the idea of mestizo, I agree with my hermano, who was talking about the fact that it was part of a classification system, and it was one way that people try to acknowledge that we are both Spanish of descent and in native descent, right? But some things are just go beyond the basic, definitions. There's so much more underneath the purpose of that term and using that term.
Mestizo?
Mestizo, yeah. I like to point out that there are different strategies of conquering. And so the US, their strategy was different because of the context of their coming to what is now North America. They came as families. They came escaping their so-called oppression from some Western European countries to settle in a new land, to make this land their home. So when they encountered native peoples who they deemed as savage and as less than, they kept those races separate. As we know, there was genocide that was pushing the natives farther and farther north in the northern, what's North America. And so their strategy was keep us separate. We are the white European race, whether they said that or not. Plenty of people did say that. And we have this native problem we have to deal with, and so we know the result of that. The Spanish military, was a different strategy. They didn't come to settle. They didn't want this to be their new land, a new home. They didn't come as families. They was the male soldiers who came to conquer. They conquered the land, the resources, and they wanted the power, right? And the labor. So their strategy is how does, like it's well known, I think Cortés had about 300 soldiers, maybe not more than that at that one point where there was that official transfer of rule from Spanish. And there were hundreds of thousands of natives there, right? How do you rule if you're just 300? Their strategy couldn't be keep the races separate. They wouldn't lose. And they didn't want to do that. They weren't here to settle and have homes. So that idea of intermixing is a long tradition of conquering nations doing that, having children with the other colonized people so that they can't leave, so that they are trapped in that, right? So now you are part of us, you are part of me too. And then the mentality, because I think, as we mentioned, there's no way that 300 people intermixed with the whole continent. So then once that idea was out there, that there was a mixing, then they culturally propagated that out and said, well, you can't be called native because you have to have some of that Spanish, otherwise we can't conquer you. But you're not going to be called Spanish because only us, we're the only white ones. So the way to conquer the strategy was the mestizo strategy as one. And I think historically, for some of us, we entered into that term kind of from the other direction. We entered that term saying, oh, this is a way that we can claim our indigenous part, our native part, you know, and it's also a way, instead of using Hispanic or Latino, it's a way that we can talk about all peoples of South Central American continent. So I think for a lot of our people that know and use the term, we discovered it and we came in a door that we thought was very benevolent. You know, we came into it thinking like, oh, it's a way that we can claim our mixed ancestry. But historically, that's not how the term was used. And even now, it's a classification that that is still being used, and I'm sure there's a lot of feelings about that and thoughts about that. But I think that's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Can-
that's a lot
can I
again
add
to
to
think
that?
about. Yes, please do.
What Dr. Samarripa was saying, it reminded me of a friend of mine that I hung out with here for a few years from Hidalgo, Mexico, and he moved back, and he lives in Mexico City, and he became a tattoo artist and became very widely recognized. And he said that this guy from Spain that recently moved to Mexico had only been there not even a full year. Either he went to get tattooed or he was with somebody that was getting tattooed. But he said, man, it was crazy. This guy from Spain, the subject of identity somehow came up. And the guy from Spain was like, what is wrong? Like, man, my ancestors, like, the Spaniards that came here originally really did a lot of damage to the people here, because everywhere I go, I see Indians. I see native people. He's like, where are they getting the idea that they could ever be mixed blood? Because there's nobody in Spain that looks like them. He said, man, the damage, I had no idea that the damage was this deep, because people who are obviously, everywhere I go, I see Indians, and they all say that they're mixed blood, and they say that they have Spanish ancestry. They would get laughed at back in Spain, he said. And I asked my friend, I was like, man, do you know how to get a hold of this guy? I want to interview him. I need to get these words and video, because our people will listen to that, sadly, because of our mental condition and our spiritual condition, our lack of connection to our ancestral roots. Our people will give that man, that European, more credence. They'll give a white face more credence than when our brown faces are saying the same thing. And that's the extent of the damage. That's how deep it is. That's how high we jump when they speak. And we don't catch that. They're the ones feeding us their version of what they manufactured as the truth. And we're eating it up. Many of us don't question that the 99% of whatever we think we believe, we think we know, or we agree with, comes from Europeans. And we ignore that fact that we've been indoctrinated all our lives, from as soon as we came out of the womb, even before. Whatever our parents did affected us, depending on the degree of assimilation. We fail to recognize that. So, I mean, when that guy said that, it's more of a confirmation that shows it's like, well, if a European says like, these guys are all of you are Indians, it talks about the damage that happened and why we're in the position we're still in, and we have to,
Yeah, absolutely.
Mixed blood does not mean mixed race. We need to really put that in our minds and get that in our psyche, in our perception, in our being.
Yeah, I mean, how do our people connect? I think part of that damage is that if they started accepting that, and even if they had to prove it with DNA tests and they're so much percent native, then we've been so disconnected from that identity at all that, and that's the damage, right? That then if I'm not mixed, if I'm not mestizo and I'm native, then what's next, right? what do I do next? And we'll talk more about that, I think. But I mean, what's next is that we start that process of reconnecting. It doesn't have to be a dead end. It doesn't have, but I
No.
think that is the fear, right? That would be the initial fear. It's like, well, if I'm Native, I have nothing, I have no connection. We have all these negative concepts growing up about being Indio, and so, you know, it's still, there would still be a next step to that, which is part of that fear that keeps people, I think, in that comfort zone of that idea of mixed race, as you were saying. I just want to throw that in. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like we got to break out of the kennel, you know. They created their caste system. With their caste system, they imposed all these pedigree names on us, you know, and we need to break out of their Eurocentric, this illusion, their matrix, their kennel, and embrace who we really are. Because when you take a wolf out of nature, you take wolves, you kill the majority of them off, or you kill a lot of them off, and you cage these wolves and you beat them to a pulp and you subject them to starvation and torture, sleep deprivation, anything. You start breeding them, you're gonna have offspring that are like broken down wolves. And then you breed those with other broken down offspring of wolves, and on and on and on. You know, we're at the point where that's what happened to us. So we were ripped from our natural environment. Now we're nothing more than, you know, a semblance of those wolves, those original wolves, where we're just like German shepherds who are dependent on these so-called masters, you know, where we don't know what to do. And we have to we depend on them for our survival. And some of us are even worse too, where we're like something like poodles, you know, where the damage is like probably irreparable and they're going to have to come back to earth in another life and remember that and not do that again. You know, that's just the way things happen, you know?
Oh man, wow.
You
Yeah.
know?
Jeez.
You
So
know,
much.
talking about that, it reminds me that we need to also be mindful about the terms that we're using. Colonization, we know, you know, is a violent thing that it just includes genocide. But also, we need to remember the better term for colonization is invasion, and the better term for, you know, intermixing is rape. It's
Yes.
a truer term. It's not a nicer term. It really, it's abrasive, right? It gives us a jolt. But we have to decide, do we hide from our true history, or do we use the correct terms? And I'd like to take this moment to make a correction of myself, or show growth in terms of my own identity. In the last plática, I want to recognize that I was experiencing my own internalized depression, and I was decolonizing my thinking as we were going along. And if you watch the second one, you'll hear me make some errors, right? Which is fine, right? We're all part of this journey. We're all growing. I kept saying, well, what we're saying is not anti-American. Now, I mean, I felt wrong in it, but I didn't know why. And later I was able to see that was my own internalized depression. Of course, speaking of our true history, of our naming ourselves, of what has happened, what is happening, talking about, you know, detention centers and these, you know, really these traumas and complex traumas that are going to take generations to heal for these children, and what our families are going through by these imposed, you know, fake imaginary lines that they call borders on our land, on our Turtle Island. By talking about this, why did that make me say what we're saying is not anti-American? That was my internalized depression. So I want to correct that. I'm not going to say that anymore, because talking about who we are, talking about our history isn't anti-American. It's pro who we are, pro reconnecting. It's okay to feel and learn a value within yourself, within your people, within your connection for who your ancestors are, who we are. And I was struggling with that. So I want to say that now in a way of modeling what we may be going through internally when we hear these conversations. They're not radical. You know, they feel radical because we weren't taught any of our history. They feel like, what? These people are crazy. What are they saying? All these things. It's because we were taught very certain, you know, indoctrinated with certain histories that were meant to keep the power in a certain place. And the evidence of that, look around. Who's in power? Where's the wealth? Where's the resources? Why are we still fighting, you know, to protect our waters, to protect our land? You know, obviously over this individualism, this Western way of living that took over, has been extremely damaging to our land, to ourselves. I mean, look at what we're saying here. So I just wanted to take that moment to talk about a way that I was feeling the fear, right? Because you know we've all been really just, I've had my butt kicked many times with these conversations where I'm told all these things like, no, you can't ignore your Spaniard blood, blah, blah, blah. And it affects you, right? It makes you a little like shell shocked. So sometimes we have those reactions where, oh, we're scared to speak of our history. So I just wanted to say that one piece before we moved on.
We're on, you know what,
All right.
what you just said, we're on autopilot. We're on
Yeah.
autopilot. We don't even stop to think why we say the things that we do. And we automatically jump, no, you're part Spanish. Why are you going around saying that? You know, how dare you?
I felt fear, you know, and
Yeah.
it's good to do the work within yourself so that you understand, why am I saying this? I don't really agree with myself. If something feels wrong, and then to take the time to really unpack that and go, oh, I was scared. I was scared that I was gonna get my butt kicked again for saying our true history. So,
Oh yeah, that
okay,
happens.
yeah. Okay, so
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
uh, um,
Somebody,
I'm just gonna close my screen because I'm in the car, but I realized that the socket only has 2 prongs and my laptop's about to die. So I'm gonna go inside and plug in. Hopefully it's quiet enough.
okay,
So I'm just gonna
okay. Do
keep
you
my
want to?
screen up.
Okay, I'll
Go
start the
ahead and
question and
talk.
then I'll repeat it for you. Okay.
Okay.
So, some of our community feel that Native American seems to erase who we are as Mexican. I mean, that's a pretty common thing. I think that's why we talked about the difference between race, ethnicity, and culture, right? So, how do we reconcile that, including our Mexican pride, including our Chicano pride, while we still call ourselves Anahuaca, Native American, while we grow, hey, and we may not choose to call ourselves, you know, Native American or Anahuaca, we're not trying to convince anybody of anything. We're only trying to just understand our history more and our who we are, even contemporarily, right? So, so the point is that we call ourselves what we want to call ourselves. We name ourselves who we are. We have that self-determination. We have that self-advocacy. We have that self-autonomy, right? So, so do we still listen to Mexican music? Do we still eat our Mexicano foods? Do we still communicate in Mexican American way? Um, do we try to reconnect with all of these things? How do we reconcile this? How do we identify with that part of who we are in terms of labels? So we're trying to reconcile, including, you know, Native American, Anahuaca, which we covered those terms, I think, in the first one or the second one, with our Mexican pride, with our, you know, Chicano pride, with our, hey man, I'm Mexican and I'm American and I'm proud of these things. So how do we reconcile those
Yeah.
things? I think, Yawi, you are making a transition. So Dr. Samaripa, do you want to start?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the things that we are trying to just bring out into the open through these pláticas is, yeah, not trying to convince, but have a discussion where we hear ourselves talk through some of these truths, because one of the main things that I see happening is that we're not able to voice these. There's not a space to voice these ideas as much. As y'all were saying immediately when you try to, you know, talk about the fact that, you know, we're native it's someone's very quick to say, no, remember you're Spanish too. So shutting down, an immediate shutdown. So here's the thing is we can't go back in time. We can't go backwards. It's never about idealizing or romanticizing what was. We can't go back and be the native community that we were over 500 years ago. That is the damage of conquest and colonization. It makes that impossible. It it affects the timeline, right? And you can't undo it. All right. So so we have now for generations ways that have been part of who we are, like our, Mexicano food and music and ways of being, that have evolved, that have come, into being. And so we can't undo that. And we don't have to be ashamed of the fact, the fact that we were disconnected, right? We don't have to be ashamed of that because we didn't do that. But if you notice that, I would say almost all the time, vast majority of the time, those things of being Mexicano or Chicano, those things that make us distinct in that way, those foods and that music, even though it has come over time and it has different influences, if you'll notice, our people have always been trying to stay connected or reconnect to our native identity, even though we didn't see it that or call it in that way. I think one of the pláticas before, my hermano Kiawi was pointed out, that we all know, but I think I like the way he had said it really clearly. Is just think about the foods that you consider Mexican, frijoles and jalapenos and all these. Most of the foods are native foods. They were indigenous native foods. They didn't have anything to do with Spain. So even Chicano, the whole point of Chicano is a lot, but one of the main things that you hear over and over was that attempt to reconnect to our native identity, to not whitewash our identity, with the understanding that we have these experiences and these lives in our contemporary world, in the United States, or even in contemporary Mexico, or other places. Right. So those pieces that have become part of our culture, they're part of who we are. We have to, I think, decide, do they still connect? Are they still meaningful to us as we are individually trying to reconnect to our native way, our native identity? That's what we're trying to do. Some things may not. Some things we may leave behind. Some ways of living we may leave behind because like, what, this is too colonial, this is too much. But some ways may just still be part of what we enjoy about being this contemporary Native American person living with these centuries of attempts to kind of whitewash that. And so in the sense of kind of being solid in who you are, who your identity is, who you are, how you identify. If that process is moving towards self-determination, if that process for you is reconnecting, then we know we can't. Reconnecting doesn't mean going back and pretending that we lived 500 years ago. Or reconnecting doesn't mean just putting on certain clothes and listening to certain music right away. That reconnecting has to be meaningful and it has to be done in a respectful way. And what are the pieces of being Mexicano, Mexicana, raza person, right? That you still feel connects with you and also helps facilitate that way to reconnecting to our native identity. Because, as we've been saying throughout these three pláticas, it's not about now re-indoctrinating everyone that's listening to us to be native. And we're not about convincing. We're about self-determination. If you're going to make a choice about how you identify, let it be a real choice, a genuine choice, a true choice. And that is really what we want for who we are as a people. We haven't been really given that true choice. So I think I kind of just went on and on, but I think
That's
that's
very
what I have.
powerful. Yeah, that's why we're taking this time to discuss all these different things. Let it be a true choice. We're not trying to force, or nobody's trying to force a particular decision, but make informed, decisions if you can about what we call ourselves. It'd be great to move towards a unifying terms, but in the meantime, let's be informed, hopefully, if we can be, which is why we're taking the time to do this. um okay, Kiawi, are you ready? I was going to reread that question. uh so some of our community feels that Native American seems to erase Mexican. That question's come up several times. How do we reconcile, including our Mexican pride, as we maybe move towards calling ourselves Native American or Anawaka, or even adding the term, maybe not shifting it, but adding it. So do we still listen to our Mexican music, eat our, Mexicano foods, communicate in our Mexican American way? Or do we try to reconnect and identify with all these different parts of who we are in terms of our history and who we are and our lived experiences? So in terms of these labels, how do we still have our Mexican pride if we begin to include calling ourselves Native or Anawaka?
Okay. First, we have to define Mexican. Mexican citizen, or what is Mexico. Mexico was a country created on our continent by who we refer to as criollos, the Creoles. The Creoles are the descendants, or the criollos are the descendants of the original Spaniards who invaded. They went to war in the 1800s. They went to war against their moms and dads in order to, because these descendants, the criollos, they saw all the resources that were leaving the continent back to Europe. Puerto Rico got its name from a port because that's where all the riqueza, or the riches, were leaving back to Europe. And then there was another port called Puerto de las Matanzas, from where these Spaniards, these European invaders, would leave the islands to go to the mainland on their looting and pillaging expeditions and raping expeditions. So when they came back, they dropped off all the resources, whether it was, gold or silver or food of any kind, and people, slave labor, that was shipped out from Puerto Rico. Okay, so they went to war against their parents. They said, we can control these resources. We need them in our hands, and we're going to call the shots. We're going to call the prices. We're going to sell them back to Europe, and we're going to make money off of this. So you had all these fake revolutions popping up around the early 1800s. Mexico's was in the early 1800s, I think 1821. I'm not sure about that. But around that time in Bolivia and other parts of South America, you saw the same pattern, these so-called revolutions. And our people were used on both sides. Our people were divided by these Europeans, and they fought on the side of the criollos, and they fought on the side of the royalists, or the Spaniards, okay, the gachupines. And after the criollos supposedly got their independence, which I think is fake because Mexico still remains a Spanish colony, a colony of Spain, an exchange was made, an exchange of power and in an agreement. Our condition has not improved since then, but that's when the country of Mexico was created. So, and Mexico is a country, and when you define the word country, it comes from the Latin word contra, against. In order to be against your neighbors, you need to build fences and walls. You need to create borders. So we have these apartheid borders that cut up our land into segments. And if you look at the history of every so-called country on on our hemisphere, what you have is a colony created by different European nations, whether it was Portugal or Spain or France, England, you name it. They're all here, you know. So that's they went to war against each other as well, and said, you know, staking their claim on our continent and then naming that country. So now we have millions of Native Americans who call themselves US citizens, call themselves Canadians, they call themselves Mexicans, they call themselves Bolivians, Argentinos, Chileans, Nicaraguans, all the way down the line. When we are not that, okay? We became that over the process of assimilation and domestication. That's how we refer to ourselves as Mexican, but Mexican is not a racial category, it's a nationality. And yes, a lot of us have embraced many aspects of this new or this encounter between two separate races that became mixed. And the truth is, you cannot separate one from the other anymore. You cannot, you know, what do we know is 100% Native American and what is 100% European? Many of us do not know it, but we make many claims and we really do not do the investigation to find out. Because if we go into the more like the less assimilated communities of Native Americans who still speak their languages in Mexico, they haven't been spared either. They also speak Spanish, many of them do. They follow the Catholic religion, you know, many of the ceremonies that have lasted, where they were not completely destroyed, embody elements of Catholicism and Christianity, you know, and many of us do not know 100% what is wholeheartedly Catholic and what is wholeheartedly Native American. We can theorize, and yes, some of us do know, like, oh, you know, it is mixed. And our, you know, our ancestral culture, many of us don't know it, so now we have this mixed culture, you know, not knowing the origins of it. For example, like mariachi music. Mariachi comes from the French word mariage, marriage. It's marriage music. That's the origin of the mariachi music that many of us like and we think is Mexican. We have to remember the French left a footprint here as well. A lot of the foods, tacos, everybody has their Taco Tuesdays. We didn't eat beef. We didn't eat pork. We had corn tortillas, but we definitely didn't have flour tortillas. Flour comes from Europe. Cows come from Europe. Pigs come from Europe. You know, and then when a lot of us participate in ceremonies, even in Mexico, a lot of people think that they're getting a 1000% purely indigenous ceremony. No, nobody was spared. Nobody was spared. Where do we go from here? You know, well, we have a memory inside of us that's ancestral. We have a native identity, a memory within, and it's a matter of reconnecting with that memory. And once we do, and yes, there are, and once we do, we remember, you know, it's not about learning. We're all struggling to learn. Like there's a really good poem called, I forgot, it's a John Trudell poem. And he said, many of us are struggling to learn the old ways when all we have to do is remember and trust ourselves. You know, many of us want to develop that connection with the natural world, the natural surroundings, and leave this domesticated, assimilated world that we've been subjected to, that we're surrounded by. That's another step. No one has, I don't think anyone has the 100%, like can answer the $1 million question with any right answer, because there are no rights and no wrongs. What we do have is people who are still blindfolded, or their eyes are closed, and they're going around like this in dark, feeling around, trying to find the way out. And in that process, we have a lot of people lambasting and punishing and chastising us for doing that, or other people for not doing it the right way, because we're trying to find the way out. And like Dr. Samarripa said, we didn't ask for this. And in war, we're going to try to find the way to survive. That's what life is. That's what living is trying to survive. And it's inherent in our genetics to survive and look for the way to survive in one form or another, and come out of this, with for the way that these scars can heal. You know, so there's many people who are doing things, mixing things up, you know, whether they call themselves Mexican, whether you have Southerners sweating with Lakota in their ceremonies, or doing this or that, or imitating other Northern nations. So because they're trying to find a way. You know, I don't know to what degree that can be punishable. We have no control over that. And I think that we save ourselves a lot of energy trying to exercise some sort of control and calling everybody out saying, you're doing this wrong. You can't do this. You can't do that. When the reality is, you know, nothing is under control. We're all trying to find a way, and there is no right way or no specific wrong way. And if we see everything play out, we step back and we see the panorama, we can see millions of us remembering who we are, trying to find a way, and embracing some kind of ceremonial aspect or a ceremony in one form or another, because they're hurting. They've been beat. And we're beginning to remember, because colonization can't last forever. So if you're going to call yourself Mexican, just know the history of where the word Mexico comes from. A lot of us get confused because these criollos used an indigenous word, Mexico, to name their portion of stolen land of the Western Hemisphere of our homeland. Therefore, we think it's a race, we think it's our identity, and we've embraced it, and we confuse it with the indigenous origin of the native origin of that word, thinking that it is a positive identifier. It just depends how you use it. You know, same thing with Chicano. But the strategy in this to win this war is when we say use the term Native American, that puts you in the population of 67% of the entire Western Hemisphere. All brown Native American people make up 67% of the entire population of the Western Hemisphere. Okay. And the thing is that billions of those people do not know that they are in fact Native American. You know, so when you look around the continent, yes.
I just wanted to say, because you're saying something, and of course, I
Sure.
want to hear whatever where you were going, but you said something and I didn't want to forget, which is in the history of the world, there have been many countries that have been colonized by invaders for hundreds of years, and then they do wind up kicking those invaders out. Yes. And then coming back. And I say that because I think what you're saying is hitting home for me really, really well, which is, we're at this point where we can't untangle what's what with certainty. And I think that sometimes makes us feel like, well, we're doing the best we can, but why should we put so much effort into identifying as Native? Why should we put so much effort in trying to reconnect? Why should we put so much effort in these quote unquote radical concepts when it's done, it's said and done, yeah. But in actuality, history proves that it's not necessarily said and done. As you said, this colonization is not necessarily going to end. It is not necessarily going to last forever. It is possible if we start this process we're doing to reconnect, to re-indigenize, as people are saying, or all the other terms, where we do start living a life that's more reconnected. Granted, starting from this point with what we know, like I said earlier, we can't go back 500 years, and that's not necessarily the goal. That's the damage of invasion that happened. But from this point forward, it is possible to move toward that reconnection where we live a life that's more aligned with ancestral memory, with that ancestral life that's in all of us. It's not impossible. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you for letting me say that.
Yeah, no, and you know what? You just reminded me of what you said. I think Harriet Tubman said it best when she said, I freed thousands or hundreds of slaves. I could have freed more if only they knew that they were enslaved or that they were slaves. And that's the position we're in right now. Many of us are going to blow this plática off, or what we're saying, and saying like, you guys are stupid, man. This is who we really are. It's because they don't know that they're enslaved. We've been pampered and spoiled by the European system to a point where God, why should we rock the boat? Why should we fight for our land back? I mean, I got a house, I'm paying taxes. It's like, it's going to take a while, but definitely it will not last forever. But it's like, when you give your body back to the land because it doesn't belong to us, and we continue our journey, when we leave the earth walk and we stop our earth walk and continue our walk in another form, do you want to walk up to a Catholic shrine and be received by European ancestors or a white Jesus? Or do you want to be received up in the Star Bridge by people that look like us, your ancestors, your parents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, all the way back? Where do you want to go? Who do you want to honor? Whose memory do you want to honor? And despite the fact that many of our are they're not ancestors yet for many of us, our parents sacrificed their lives and their identity and their well-being so we could be here right now, and we think of all our ancestors behind them, with them, who did what they did so that we can be here at this moment to talk about this. And so the question is, how are we going to honor our ancestors' sacrifices? Whether they knew they were Native or not, and hid it intentionally, or they were already to the point where that didn't even cross their minds, But being involved in ceremony brings them back into that connection on the other side and allows them to continue their walk, back to the ancestral road. That's one thing many of us, of course, nobody really discusses this, or it doesn't come up, but I wanted to put that into perspective. Are you happy living your life as a slave? Because you're getting something out of it. You get to have a TV and a car, definitely not in the conditions that our ancestors in the 15, 16, 1700s had to suffer, because they knew that too much pressure applied would ensure a revolt. So it's just why I have the image behind us. They gave us a little bit more so that we don't revolt. It's like a pressure cooker. It must have an escape valve for the steam. If you don't have that, the pressure cooker is going to explode. Every now and then they have to open up that steam valve a little bit more because we're applying a little too much pressure. We don't want a revolt. We don't want these nobodies, these fake Indians or Indians, whatever, to turn around and start clamoring for land back or demanding that they get their land back. So,
I mean, we see the similar things happening, of course, in this, what is called the United States too, right? With, anybody that has claim to the land or who was brought here, like African-American brothers and sisters too, right? Reparations, all of it's a similar tune, because people realize that this history is not as laid out as it is in the textbooks. It's not as seamless as it's presented. There were some real breaking and tearing apart, and I think hopefully more people are starting to look at what those conditions were. And I think it speaks to that sense that a lot of us feel, and we've talked about in different ways, that we can explain that sense of just not feeling like you know who you are, but also feeling like there's something that is missing, or there's a little discomfort, or no one ever really did anything to me in this society or country. Sometimes people will say that, but there's still something out of place. And then feeling bad or guilty for like, well, why am I questioning that? Or feeling like we're questioning the good fortune that we've had. There's always a little discomfort. And I think, Lasatiani, you have talked a little about that before.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that again. Like, it can feel like a personal affront. Did I cut you off? Were you still talking?
No.
It can feel like a personal affront, like, these people saying all these things, like attacking my people, attacking my, my Mexicanness, attacking all these things. But you forget, we all have these different pieces ourselves, right? All of us that are thinking critically about our history and about these racial institutions that really affect who we are, and yeah, just keep us having less resources. um we are also, I have pride in my father, was so passionate about mariachi music, and the recipes that we share with our family, that we cook, that we eat around, that we pray, for the all the hands that made the food, for the hands that planted the seeds, pray, thanking the plants, and the animals that give their life for our nourishment. So we have all these pieces to us too, the way we celebrate. We're not saying to turn away from what you love and the pieces of who you are. No, just there's no personal attack in just having more information, in knowing, in making informed choices, right? Maybe we want to make some shifts, right? Maybe we want to explore which foods are our native foods. So it's more information. It's not a shutting down of what we love and who we are. I have a very strong history, a Catholic root, right? My dad was a deacon. I spent 3 days a week in church. I would go by myself and lead the rosary with the abuelas by myself as a fourth grader. So, we have these connections, and I have a place in my heart for being in church and listening to the Our Father in Spanish. I don't have to reject that part of my past, right? I can move forward, right? And expand my understanding and my knowing, and make choices about what I share with my children and we pass on, and recovering and reconnecting with our ancestors, right? Yes. Dr. Samaripa.
Oh, no, I was waving at Sebas. Who's on
Oh,
the
oh, I know. I saw Sebas earlier. So we really do have to do a personal exploration about why it may feel like an attack to have more information and have more perspective. And to do that personal exploration, even now they're trying to get rid of ethnic studies, even to a more extent, because we're doing more things like this, where people are connecting and reconnecting and waking up. There's like this despierta that's happening across the lands, where people are reconnecting. Native people are reconnecting. Mexican native people, if you want to put it that way, are reconnecting. And so, that's why we focus on self-determination. That's why with the Institute of Chicana Psychology, we connect knowing our identity with our wellness, with our well-being. And we say it's a revolutionary act to raise a healthy family, if you're Mexican, if you're native, or however you want to put it. And we say that wellness is an act of resistance. That's why they're combined. The psychology, the knowing who we are, is so important to our strengths. So I don't want to get too much off track, but I always want to bring us back to the personal struggle or the personal work that it'll take once we plant these seeds of information, of knowing, of history, of the contemporary connections, the ways our families are interacting with the systems that are in place. Self-determination, autonomy, so that we can plant our own foods, so that we can reconnect with the land, so that we can live more in alignment. These things are part of this, waking up to who we are completely.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to, let's see, it's 12:37 that community had posed.
Hermana, could I
Go
just
ahead.
add a quick thing to what you said? On that token, this
Absolutely.
fight for survival, it's like, look at this little guy right here. Who are we doing this for?
Yeah.
What kind of world are we going to put them in?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we want them to be like, to continue to, like, if you look at the image that I set up in the background, is that how we want them to live?
No.
Do we want our children, do we want to subject our children and their children to a continued form of slavery and servitude to the invaders? No, of course not. There's a spark in us that is doing this for a reason, because we know that something's wrong and we're calling it out for what it is. And colonization, like hermano Dr. Samaripa was saying, in other countries, there are replete examples of colonization failing and people reclaiming the land. Yes, there's a lot of damage control to be done afterwards, but I mean that's a given. You know, you're going to pick up the pieces and try to put it back together or build something new out of it. But the point is like people repelled these invasions and the colonial efforts of the invaders. It's happening right now. How many of us can go back 20 years ago and see how many of us and how many people in general, Native people, were out in the open talking about this? Hardly any of us could say that we were having these conversations because we weren't there yet. And the people who knew about the Native people who were already there, they were, what do you call it? They were, they were isolated and they were very few. So it's like the giant is awakening. You know, colonization can't last forever. And they know this. They're watching this and they study social media and they see the patterns, they see the comments. Their algorithms are programming all this, and they're going to try and cut us off at the pass. You know, they're going to try and wait for us at the corner and do something to prevent this, because they will do anything in their power. If they killed millions and millions of natives when they first landed here to take the continent, what makes us think that they wouldn't do something again, covert?
Well, they're starting to already. Right. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead. I mean,
to keep a hold of the land and resources.
Mm-hmm. The invasion that they see from our southern brothers and sisters, where they started doing those family separations, right? You know, those, which we don't have to go into that, but that was unthinkable in this day and age. But obviously not so unthinkable that they didn't implement it. And there's a lot of reasons, a lot of different contemporary reasons, blah, blah, blah. But, that's why, Trump or whoever, we don't have to talk about that, so easily came in, because even though we have the typical political system that, has all its drawbacks or whatever, even then people were starting to talk about, allowing conversations. We had the Standing Rock is one example. We had this. And that was it was barely anything, but it was enough to allow this pushback to let's let these people come in. Let's let people separate people at the border. I mean, it's all part of what you're saying, but it's so much deeper than even the things that we see on the news. It's because people are misbehaving a little bit, just enough. And boom, it's already that kind of pushback. Imagine what happens if people really, as you were speaking, to really kind of start organizing and moving forward. I mean, there is going to be a pushback, but that pushback can't last forever.
That's why these terms are so important. That's why we spent the time talking about migration versus immigrant, because you make us the other, you make us invading here. We can't be invaders on our own land. We're crossing these apartheid borders, and we're crossing them because of conditions that the U.S. had created in Mexico, Central America, South America. And then we want to villainize the people that are migrating north because of those conditions that we put in place with our policies and our interference in those parts of our continents, of our land. So also, one thing we wanted to talk about, let's see. Well, are we ready to move on? Did anybody want to add? No, we're ready.
Okay. On the part of the immigrant misnomer for our people, family separation. This family separation is not an isolated event. Family separation began when Columbus landed in 1492 and began robbing 9-year-old girls and selling them to his captains and soldiers so that they could be raped and sold as prostitutes. So thus began the sex trade on our land, on our continent. Family separation was carried out throughout anywhere Europeans set foot on our continent. We can see it most recently with the residential schools, where children were ripped from their families and indoctrinated, subjected to torture, rape, and death, and the Indian boarding schools as well. So family separation is nothing new. We think it is. It's because we don't know who we are, and we're getting there. You know, it's been ongoing since Columbus invaded. That's all I wanted to add.
Right. And then the detention centers too, right? I mean,
That
it's happening
yes,
right now, you know. So it's never
concentration camps.
stopped. It's important to make those connections. It's never stopped. And we have to look in ourselves and understand why we turn away. Well, we turn away because it's painful, right? But we need to turn toward what's happening in this war. It's really an apt term, war. Hi, Sebas. So also, you know, real quickly before we switch to the next question is you know, I like what y'all were saying about, you know, we don't haven't really used the word capitalism, but too much in this part. But capitalism, right? You know, people, some one of you said, yeah, people are like, well, I this hasn't nothing bad's really happened to me. I'm doing okay. I haven't really experienced racism. But if you look at your capitalist goals, right? Are you happy working in all of these ways, being disconnected from the land, having to be reliant on how you get food, how you get water, how you can live, being separated? Are you happy, you know, with all working all those hours, not being able to spend time with your family, with that imbalance? Our own daughter, she's 23, right? And she's trying to launch her life in the way that she wants, right? Well, she got accepted to a PhD program, and she, you know, has really worked within herself and decided she didn't want to go. She didn't go. And it's a little scary, right, with this capitalist way of going, you know, and being and just having just enough to be okay. We were scared, you know, how is she going to survive? She's a small brown Chicana, right? This young woman, how's she going to make it? But no, again, in decolonizing, she's going to explore other ways of being, other ways of connecting to those resources, right? So that's partly why we maybe feel like y'all were saying, well, we're a little comfortable, we're okay. But really exploring, are we okay? How okay are we? Are we living the way we want to live? Taking off the Western lens and putting on our ancestral lens. You know, how do we really want to live? With that picture that Kiawit has in the background, you know, it really hit me when he said, "Do we want that for our children?" I have been fighting for my children for almost 24 years. I'm still raising children under the age of 13, and no, I don't want that for my children. And I want us to find ways to reconnect to the power of who we are as a people, right? And having the self-autonomy and the self-determination to live in the way we want to live on our turtle island, right? On our land, so that our families can flourish. That is why it's important to know who we are and to think critically about how we label ourselves, or whether we even want to use any of these terms, or what we call ourselves. Um, Okay, so I just wanted to say that one piece about what we've been talking about.
I'm sorry, I know we need to
and
move on to the next question, but I
that's
just
okay.
wanted to say what you just said is important. The strategy that we're talking about, that we ask our people, which is a form of surviving and empowering our children, so that generations later we have millions of little brown children who will become adults and are going to be conscious of the reality that's surrounding them. And it's going to be a diminishing reality. You know, the more brown children we bring into this world, and that's what they don't want. But in terms of calling ourselves Chicanos and Mexican Americans, Bolivians, Argentinos, and all this, but when we know that we're Native American, uh, we have claim to the Western Hemisphere as our homeland, rather than saying, oh, I'm Mexican, and you're subjecting yourself to a tiny part of the Western Hemisphere. You're not recognizing your ancestral identity, and you're giving yourself a fake nationality created by Europeans. When we call ourselves Chicanos, which, I mean, and all this is fine, but we just like, let's be strategic. And if you're going to use those terms, use them with great care. You know, when we call ourselves Chicanos or Chicanas, we're saying that we're giving credence to the apartheid borders. We're giving credence to two nationalities there. We're subjecting ourselves, isolating ourselves to a tiny portion of the Southwest US or other parts of the United States. You know, when we say that you're Canadians, again, you're subjecting yourself to another stolen territory with apartheid borders. As opposed to Native American, you're part of the giant family of the Western Hemisphere. This is all strategy where, you know, you don't want to leave any room for debate, and you don't want anything used against you, or you don't want to give anybody ammunition. We're at war. We're not going to give the enemy ammunition in this information war against us, this propaganda war. So we need to stop putting ammunition in their heads.
That's
and arm ourselves.
true.
Yes,
You know,
anytime.
and
It's
and it
strategy.
just brings
Yeah.
our and taking and meeting people where they're at, right? I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about how I call my daughter a Chicana, and I'm fine with that. You know, we're having these discussions. Again, we're not trying to convince each other of anything. I don't know if she would identify. I think she does. She knows very well that she's Native. I mean, she has her degree in cultural anthropology, so she very knowledgeable in the fact that she is Native. But in terms of making these connections, yeah, it just reminds me of where we're all at. I'm thinking of all the thousands and thousands of Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx, Mexican, Mexican American, Anahuaca, Native, all the ways in which we identify, all the people out there trying to reconcile the pieces, you know, that are important to them, that they're going to keep, that maybe they're going to shift, and that it's a living thing that we're doing. It's changing, it's morphing, it's connecting, it's shifting, and that, you know, nobody nobody feels shame or bad about where you're at in that, or what you're doing. Like, oh, should I not be doing it? Yes, you should. You know, just think about it critically, just make shifts and choices and reconnect, you know, in a good way, no matter who's down on you. You know, a lot of our own selves are down on us. A lot of people will get after you if you're trying to reconnect and be like, hey, remember that you have Spaniard blood, or hey, what are you doing trying to reconnect as Native? You know, you're messing things up for the other natives. No, we are from this land. We have the right to reconnect. And if we want to eat our flour tortillas, you know, so be it. Like, you know, enjoy who you are. You know, the point is that we heal and rise together, right? So, yeah, there's just so many different intersections about where we are. And yeah, this conversation flows the way it needs to go. So if you know, we're having this conversation in a circle always, you know. So if anybody wants to continue or say something else, that's fine. We don't need to go on to the next question. It's how we do it. Did anybody want to add anything else? Oh, wait, I do see a question here. This question always comes up. Let's see. Claudia, yes. People, we bring this up at every single one in section part 1, part 2, and part 3.
And it looks like you
The
kind
same
of started
thing.
answering it as well. In what you were
Yeah,
just saying.
I don't want to, we want to take into consideration other Native Americans who have, oh, they say who have little or no European blood, like most mestizos do. Here we go back to qualifying our blood. Thank you, Claudia. This is a very common question. I don't want to offend, she says I don't want to offend Native peoples, but as we decolonize, we want to say we don't want to offend other Native groups other than ourselves, whose experiences are very different from mine. A mestiza from Mexico. Do I think of myself more as Native? Oh, I do think of myself more as Native, but I can't deny the advantages that European blood has given me, given my ancestors. Yes, that's something that comes up a lot. Like, I don't want to deny the advantages that, are you saying maybe light skin that European blood has given you? Because European blood hasn't given us any advantages, except maybe if you're talking about skin
Maybe
color.
European, the European
Or
colonist lifestyle.
lifestyle. Okay. So yeah, who wants to address that? That not wanting to offend other Native peoples as we reconnect to the fact that we are from this continent.
Well, I think, and I think, man, Mano Chiavi definitely wants to put in. I would say we've addressed that. I think we've talked about, you know, many different ways in which in which we could, in ways in which we could approach that, in the ways in which we didn't ask to be colonized or conquered. And also that we can't go back 500 years, nor can we pretend to go back 500 years and pick up. And that reconnecting doesn't mean putting on feathers and, listening to, just the fact that we are native as the foundation. Everything else on top of that is a consequence of this complex colonization and conquest, and trying to separate the propaganda from the experiences that we've had. Hermano, I think you wanted to say something.
Claudia, don't apologize. This is a wonderful question, and we need to go over these over and over and over, right? Don't
Yes.
apologize.
Yes,
We're
I'm
not
sorry,
saying
maybe, right, please, yeah.
we're okay. So Claudia's saying she's very dark, so she's not talking about those advantages. What advantages of European blood then are you talking about? Maybe type it in the chat if you can. But no, we're not saying you have to go back. We know we're limited in resources and time, right? We're all working, we're raising kids, we're doing all these things. Yeah, we're happy to just touch on it again, but do go back and watch Brown Identity section 1, 2, and then this is the third one, because this is something, yeah, we're conditioned to think that we're going to offend other natives if we reconnect to the fact that we're native. So yeah, Kiawi, did you want?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Claudia, how are you? I'm reading your questions, and let me see, let's go through them really quick. How do we also take into consideration Native Americans who have very little to no European blood? Well, you look like one of those with very little to no European blood, like most mestizos do. Again, mestizo the term is a creation of the Spaniards and their imposed caste system. To assume that most native people, that any native person in Mexico has Spanish blood, we do not have the exact numbers. We've been trained to assume that. And mestizaje culturally, yes, our cultures have been mixed. I don't want to offend native peoples whose experiences are very different from mine. Can I say that, in the larger panorama of the Western Hemisphere, we are all sharing the same experience as far as being native to this continent, and our land has been invaded, and we are experiencing colonization, invasion in one form or another. Now,
can I ask you a question?
Yes.
My name is Paul Soto. I just entered the room. I'm from San Jose, Califas. My question to you is, how are you different? You just stated that your experience is different. Can you articulate how?
I don't know. It depends.
Are you talking to Anna or?
No, I'm talking to the gentleman. He made a statement that he was talking about that there was a very clear distinction between a native psychology and a however he defines himself. And so my question to him was, what is that? How come you can't relate to that? How come? Because the bloodlines are native to, this is a raza indígena. So in California,
yes,
it doesn't matter Spanish, those are irrelevant. You're a raza indígena, that means you have bloodlines that are connected to this land. And so I was curious, I know that. So I was curious to know what his psychology was with regard to that statement that he made. I want to know
I think that we're saying that we are native, that there isn't a difference. So no. I don't know. Is there somebody in particular? Was it Dr. Samaripa or was it Kiawi that
the homo with the hat?
Okay.
No. What I said was that many of us are experiencing colonization and the effects of colonization to various different degrees.
How?
As native people.
Okay, now
I don't know. I would have to know what your life, how you lived your life, and the effects of colonization is. Everyone here has their own personal experience.
No, but you made the
being a
statement.
product of, we all have the different experience of being assimilated or domesticated to varying degrees. I can't
agree with that,
say
but
to what
you
degree
made the
we're
statement.
different. That what exactly?
What you just said. You said that
What did-
there's people experience colonization to different degrees. Okay, so that
Right.
means that you have already like made that made those determinations and those judgments. And so what I'm asking you is that based on that, on what you've already been able to assess within yourself, can you give me some examples of what those differences are in terms of differing degrees of colonization?
Okay, yeah, sure. Like
Yeah, because
let's go to Mexico, and there's people that I know who still speak their original native languages. You know, I didn't grow up speaking any of my ancestral languages. They did. They were touched by Catholicism. You know, to what degree are they less assimilated or domesticated than me personally? You know, I used to have a Nahuatl teacher, and I would ask her all these questions. You know, I go to Mexico regularly. I travel throughout Mexico, and I ask these questions to different people. Some of them know more about their ancestral history than any one of us here in this forum or the listeners.
that's cool because they're down
especially.
there. So do you identify California as your native land, or do you identify the colonizers' definition of what is Mexico and what is not? See, because this is Mexico.
I'm talking about the continent before there ever was a Mexico. Before you joined, we talked about how Mexico was created by the criollos, the descendants of the original Spanish invaders.
Yeah, I know. I'm connected to. My bloodlines are connected to the Cumbia. I have birth certificates right here in my possession.
Yeah.
I think, Paul, we're in agreement. I think we're all in agreement with you, and largely. I think that that we definitely just had those conversations that this is native land, right? That California, Texas, these are all native lands. It's all part of Turtle Island. So we're in agreement with that. And then, so I think that, I know, Shirley, you have a question, but maybe we're going into the next question. Let's see. I'm going to ask the last two questions. I know our time is up. We always go over.
Oh, shoot. You're ending right now?
Yeah.
You've been on since 11.
Oh, man. It says on my thing from 9 to 1. I mean, from 11 to 1.
Central time.
We have it recorded.
That's what it
but
is.
You know what, Paul?
We have it recorded.
That is.
Okay, Paul. It's
yeah.
recorded. It's recorded. You can listen to this one recorded, and there's a section 1 and a section 2. So you know what? We welcome your palabra. We really don't shy away from having the conversation.
Okay.
No, you know what? We'll send
Eastern
it to you.
time.
If you put your email in the chat, we'll send it to you recorded.
Okay,
yeah,
please,
no, thank
please.
you. We're all here
appreciate that.
to discuss together. Yes, thank you. So yeah, we all add to the discussion. This is a circle, right? There's no one in front, no one behind. So thank you for your palabra. Shirley, I know you wanted to add too. So let me ask the last two questions. And you know, we do end at 1, but we always go over. Kiawit and Dr. Samaripa, you're all okay going over a little bit?
Yeah, no, not a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so and also honoring everybody's time. If you need to get off, of course, that's fine. And we will post the video like always. So let's say the last two questions, and then Shirley, if you want to give your what you had to say, and then we will hopefully, I think it's all connected really from this point forward. So I'm going to say the last two questions. Let's discuss anti-Indigenous attitudes. So one thing we don't often talk about is anti-Indigenous and anti-Native attitudes in our community, right? Which I think we're all experiencing when we ask some of these questions that we're asking of ourselves. Beyond, let's see, about the anti-Indigenous and anti-Native attitudes alive in our community beyond skin color. So not just negative attitudes towards darker skin, but anything that is connected to our Native ways of life. That's one question. The other one, okay, so the other one's different. I'm just going to say it now when we can go back. Who is benefiting from calling ourselves Hispanic, Latino, mestizo, any of these terms, are we benefiting? How are the real Latinos, I say this in quotes, and the real Hispanics benefiting from the system, mechanism, commodification of Latinidad? So we may not have time to go over that last one. We did that, I think, in the second plática, because we know, right, that there are white Latinos that value their whiteness more and are oppressive to a lot of our Native sisters, brothers, and siblings, which we've talked about in part one and part two. So going back to that question, let's discuss anti-Indigenous attitudes. One thing we don't often talk about is anti-Indigenous, anti-Native attitudes alive in our community beyond skin color. So including negative attitudes towards darker skin and adding anything that is connected to our Native ways of life. Shirley, did you want to speak now? I give your palabra. I know that you were, okay.
I always say something at the end. But I just want to say that Paul's joining the event is an example of what we all are going to have to dig into. And that is that oppositional consciousness, right? I mean, nobody has the correct answer at this point. We are not there yet. We are in process. Our discussion is leading us toward where we all need to go. We need to hear Paul's question. Paul's question could be the topic for next week's talk or next month's talk, because it is an essential question. What is going to bring Native people from the North America to with indigenous populations of Mexico and Latin America? How are we going to bridge those notions? What language are we going to use? What new definitions are we going to come from? I just want to say one thing. I love that issue about African Americans, and they're pretty solid about being Black, right? They're not saying I'm part Black, I'm mixed Black, I'm light Black. No, they're Black. And they're rooting their experience from 1619, which is their birth via slavery, right? So what we're doing is we're rooting our experience, 1492, the arrival of Europeans, to our voice and history around colonization of Native peoples throughout all continents, or the whole continent of Latin America, right? So that is our essence. Now, I'll tell you that there's an underlying contention between the African Americans and Latinos right now, because they're claiming that date, and we can't stop them because they have that right. That is their context. But we have to develop our own context. So Paul is right. And all of this, and what we're all talking about, is trying to navigate to that indigenous space of 1492. But listen to the dialectic that comes up. Oppositional consciousness, right? I mean, no one has the total answer. Jessica, you shouldn't be responsible for feeling. Manuel, you shouldn't feel responsible for having the entire answer. It's not in you. It's going to be in us. And we're all going to travel this path together. And I'm very happy. Claudia and I live in Santa Cruz. Where are you all from? You're from Los Angeles?
We are in Tejaslan. We're in Austin, Texas.
And Paul is in San Jose. So this is the first meeting, I think, where we have come California to Texas. And this is really cool. Okay.
I think we also have England in the house. Is that
where's
right?
that?
Yeah,
Where's that?
We have England.
I'm in London. I'm in London.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes. Thank you, Thais.
I'm colonizing the UK.
All right.
There's Chicanos in England?
I'm done.
Yeah, we have.
Hey man, we're everywhere. We're
everywhere.
They got hippies in England.
Yeah, with the Pláticas with the Institute, we have Chicanos that come in from Australia, from the UK, from Latino. Well, no, we don't use those terms, right? Latinos that we're trying to. Let's say raza. Let's say Anahuaca. Let's say Native peoples. With the cultura that we're, unpacking right now from all over the
Chicanos in Australia.
So thank you, Shirley, again for sharing your palabra and for bringing to the center that we are all part of this. We are not arriving to a definitive answer, but we are all contributing to ways in which we can reconnect and hopefully unify, right? so that we can, instead of just survive, we can flourish, right? As a native people on our continents, right? So, hi, Sebas. Hi, Papacito Lindo. I love when the kids come on. So, thank you for everybody sharing that moment, right? It's nice to have all of our voices, and I wish we could be all together, right? To have these conversations, but at least we get to use this technology to do it. So, is there, Yawi, Dr. Samaripa, should we move on to let's discuss anti-Indigenous attitudes, anti-Native attitudes? Is there another question that you would want covered now that we're at the end?
Yeah, if that's okay, hermano, we can touch on the anti-native, anti-indigenous attitudes, probably briefly, and if it looks like that could be something to continue at some point, we could. And is that all right, hermano? Start.
Sure, no problem.
I know we have a little bit of time, and I think what comes up for me is that. We've been talking about this the whole 2 hours, I think, in a lot of ways, in very clear, I think, direct ways that we are Native. But there are still those things that we hear in our families. I mean, one of the conversations that's been coming up a lot, is the inclusion of our African descent, African American brothers and sisters that were, stolen from their land, brought over here to this continent, also to be slaves. And coming into what became known as Latin America, and then these attitudes these racial divides that those in power have used to pit us against one another. And so we've heard some of those the anti-African American, anti-Black attitudes in our Rasa communities, which is true, but I think also it's not just, as we said, not just skin color, but and not just that, we have to say we're mestizo because we're Spanish too. That we say that people give us that flack, right, when we try to say that we're indigenous or native. But anything that is about being native just has this reaction in our familias, in our communities. Even still, you have somebody with a trenza, like, oh, se parece muy indio, and it's a negative. And so I just wanted to kind of give voice to that. I don't have a specific answer or where to go. Just the fact that I think we need to start talking about those anti-native attitudes that we have that are just from an identity perspective. I mean, talk about self-denial, right? Talk about self-hatred even sometimes. And I know we're in contemporary. We would say like we're in a contemporary place. We have our contemporary stuff, music, family, cultura, but anytime we approach anything that talks about us being native, it's like no, it's like the worst thing you can be, right? As Indio, and I think we're not going to heal as a community until we address that and realize that is doing the work of that racist ideology that will do anything to keep us from identifying not just with looking native, but with living in a native way, right? So I just wanted to put that out there, hermano, if you want to speak to that in any way.
Yes, yeah, on social media, our group has been hit quite a bit from whether it's northern natives or even in Mexico. And it's only a small contingent, it's a really small amount of people that are there acting as obstacles when our people want to reclaim their native ancestral roots. They jump in and say, no, you can't do that. You're not Native American, you're not indigenous. The real indigenous people are the ones living in these impoverished communities or on reservations who still speak their language or still have some semblance of their ceremonies and on and on. What they're doing is that they're helping the Europeans or the invaders with imposing the colonial agenda on the rest of us. Because in Mexico, the term indígena has the protocols for someone who is indígena, according to the Mexican government, has to be somebody who's still living in their native community, still speaks the language, still participates in their ceremonies, and on and on.
Mhm.
Anybody else that looks like them that does not fall in that category are mestizo or non-native, Hispanic, Latino. And this is intentional. Same thing here in the United States. There's millions of Native people who were left unrecognized by the United States federal government, and that was intentional. They picked and they chose the communities that they were going to call American Indian or Native American, so that they could erase millions of brown people from that identity and have them be lost into their illusion. So now we have these people embracing that recognition from these invader governments, telling us that we are not Native American or that we cannot claim to be the race that we really are. So now they don't know that they're doing the government, they're helping the invasive government with that, with that illusion, that propaganda and those lies. I know a Native woman who's Potawatomi up in Michigan from the larger Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people. And she said that what happened to their people, what she noticed before she began to look at so-called Mexicans and Chicanos and Bolivians and see the rest of them as like, oh, they're Native American too. Before that, she said, the people, my ancestors who survived the Indian boarding schools, when they got back into their ancestral communities, they were taught that they were like the only survivors of that, therefore that they were like the only ones left. So then they took that further and started telling their offspring and the younger people, we're the last of the living Native Americans, and they embraced that, so that they created a border. They enclosed themselves in and left everyone else out who was not recognized by the federal government, who went through the same exact thing they went through. But she said, after social media, interacting with my Southern relatives, I realized that they're Native American too. But that was a very interesting experience from somebody who went through that, who said, and began to see like, damn, well, once you really open your eyes and you look at them, they look exactly like us because they are the same as us. They're Native American too. So yes, this is all part of that programming that began in 1492 when child separation began there, the breaking up of families, the imposition of caste systems and other like misnomers and false labels was to misguide millions of people and in the future secure the land and the resources in the hands of their descendants centuries from now. I know an elder from South Texas who I know you all know him, and he said that Plasaltiani and Dr. Samarripa, you know him. He said that this white man from a university working on his PhD approached him once because he knew that this South Texas elder had access to the elders in the Native nations up in Oklahoma who are on the reservations over there. And he said, hey, I'm working on this PhD on the peyote ceremonies and, on and on and on. I was wondering, if I could interview you, and I'd like to maybe, if you can hook me up with the elders up north, up in Oklahoma, who are using peyote now. And he told me, he's like, well, I put him to the test to see how he would answer this question. I asked him, and he's like, hey, let me ask you something. He told the white guy, he said, what do white people tell their children in order for their children to be successful? And he thought about it, and he told him, he's like, you know what? We don't have to tell them anything. We just put everything in their hands. So he admitted, we don't have to because we have it all. And he told him, we have it all. We don't have to tell them anything. We have all the resources. We have all the wealth. We just hand it over to them. So, with that in mind, that's why we're still at war. That's why we're in this 500 plus year war, because they see our populations jumping back from ongoing genocide, that they could not kill us all off. So they're doing everything in their power to scramble everyone's minds and erase their memories so they don't come back and remember that, hey, wait, I'm Native American. Therefore, if I'm Native American, hey, wait, this is my continent. Hey, you know what? I read some history and white people are the real immigrants. They're the invaders. Well, you know what? I want my land back. And they start looking for other people on the same mind, on that same page, and they start uniting. So our people have, the ones who are trying to call the shots, they call them indigenazis, who are being the native gatekeepers. They feel that they have something special. And when we come around remembering who we really are, they say, no, this is ours, not yours. And that's the mental, the colonial damage that they're showing. Where they're willing to stand up for where they're willing to support the white man's European systems of division and fragmentation, because they feel that they feel threatened by us, that we're going to want to take what they have. And it's like, it's just a matter of, we're realizing that we're Native American. We're not here to take whatever you think you have or is yours. And besides, there's a lot of Native communities in Mexico and in the North who are recognizing and embracing Southern relatives, because the power is in numbers. If we can't unify on the simple basis that racially we are Native Americans, just that alone is enough to unite the 67% mass majority that we are on the entire Western Hemisphere. You look around, the majority of the people in the Western Hemisphere, they're not white, they're not black, and they're definitely not Asian. I mean, nothing against them, but we see nothing but brown people from light to dark skin. Who are these brown people? Where did they come from? They didn't come from anywhere else. They're from here. And we're still here. We're still here. We've always been here. So on that fact, we can all win, because this is not some sort of a competition, where it's like, in order for your group or your community to win or stay alive, the rest have to perish and be subjected to the same slavery. No, this has to be a win-win situation where we all come together in one major agreement that, yes, we're Native American. We've been living under 527 years of theft, rape, and murder, and it hasn't stopped. And we want to reclaim our true identity, and we're waking up our people, making them remember, because we want our land back. We're just tired of it. There's not that many of us saying this. There's more than 20 years ago. We already talked about that. 20 years ago, we thought we were the only ones. Like, how do I find people who are just remembering like me? Look where we're at. We're all coming together. Colonization can't last forever, but we've been fooled to think that we're powerless, that we're a minority, we're nobodies. We're these poor, confused brown people who lost their native identity and are half this or half that. Therefore, they have no claim. Just shut up and live in colonial peace. Accept what you got. Be happy with. You're lucky you have TVs now, and you get to do this and enjoy these benefits of our screwed up, backward society or world. Anything to keep us in that that submissive, obedient position. And that's the truth. Because if you think that they're going to give the okay, you guys, you're waking up. Here's my ranch. Here's my estate. Here's my mansion. We're going to go back. They're not going to go back to Europe. If they killed millions of us since 1492, billions of, or whatever it was, what makes us think that they're not going to do it again? They know they can't do it the way they did before. Maybe. Who knows?
Detention
But that's where
centers,
it's
they're
at.
still doing it.
Detention centers, concentration camps, inoculations, disease, subject to
They did
disease.
it in prison. The Corcoran
Exactly.
murders
Prison,
in 1995.
Yes.
prison system.
In
Still happening, yeah,
1995, they
imprisoning.
were opening those doors, popping them. Homeboys were going out, and they were literally picking off the loser of the fight because he lost a couple $1,000s because he bet against them.
Right.
I was
That's
there at
another
that time.
form. Thank
Yeah.
you for adding that, Paul. Yeah, we can't forget the prison systems and the school to prison pipeline. So there's many, many ways that people think it's invisible, but that it's still happening. And again, knowing our history, knowing our contemporarily what's happening to our people, to our families, isn't anti anything, isn't anti anybody. It is pro ourselves. It feels, if we are speaking from our internalized depression, and what's been done to us, we feel bad, like, ooh, we shouldn't be saying these things because it's anti. No, knowing who we are, supporting who we are, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a way for us to survive, to be in community together, to support each other. These are all positive things. taking the parts of who we are, understanding who we are. That is not anti anybody. That is pro us. And there's so many messages that tell us not to be pro who we are, but to think of ourselves as criminals, as invaders, as, immigrants taking jobs. How can we be immigrants on our own continent, on our
Right.
own land, of
Exactly.
our own ancestors?
Our ancestors
So
are buried
it is
in these, right?
in these lands, and practicing our own ceremonies. Now we do need to reconnect in a respectful way, right? We need to reconnect to our ceremonies. We need to reconnect to our medicine, to our ancestral ways in a respectful way, but that doesn't mean we don't have the right to reconnect. I just wanted to interject that. So I think we're 30 minutes, 25 minutes over. Did anybody, Dr. Samaripa, Kiawi, did you want to give your closing palabra? And remember, everybody, these part 1, part 2, and part 3 of Brown Identity, where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. Is that the exact title, Dr. Samaripa? What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they
Yeah, I
type
think
that
the
in,
first
they'll
one is
find it.
where we've been, where we are now, and I think this one is where we are and where we're going. And the middle one, I don't think the
Okay,
middle one had a
so
title. I think it just was part 2.
okay, so then if you find those, they're on YouTube, they're on rasapsychology.org, they're
Oh,
on
They're on
the,
where,
Facebook,
where,
también.
where?
They're on
Wait,
Facebook.
hold on.
they're
Okay,
on,
where's it at?
so on Facebook, we're under the
Okay.
Institute of, what is
Facebook.
it, Dr. Samaripa?
Chicano psychology.
Institute
Chicano
of
psychology.
Chicano
Okay.
Psychology.
Okay.
And
What about
then,
YouTube? Do you have any lectures? Like,
Oh, and if
there's,
you look at our website, rasapsychology.org,
okay,
we have some stuff on there.
Psychology.org.
and then .org.
Okay.
And also, Brown Continent has a lot of good resources and
Brown
discussion.
Continent. Okay.
Yes. And Kiawe, you said didn't you say a podcast or a show that you were on that had really good talks on identity?
On YouTube, they're called Indigenous Podcast.
Indigenous podcast. And
Podcast.
where are they?
On YouTube.
YouTube. Okay. Indigenous podcast.
And there's a really good sister on YouTube. Also, look up Mexican Excellence. Mexican Excellence.
Mexican
yes,
excellence. Okay.
She has a lot of really good videos where she explains it on a lot of these topics and much more.
Yeah.
And Brown Continent is on Facebook, on Instagram, and we also have a website on the internet.
Mexican. What was that Hannah's name? Mexican what?
Her name is. She calls herself Mexican Excellence.
Excellence. Okay. Yeah, I need some balance, men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes,
there you go.
absolutely.
And if you scroll up in the conversation, let me copy it. Wait, if you scroll up, I shared some links here from Jack Forbes, who's a Native American author. May he rest in peace. But they're right there about Eurocentric concepts harm Native people. And I put an article to a paper he wrote called The Mestizo Concept, a Product of European Imperialism. Let me copy this and I'm going to recopy it. I'm going to repost it in the...
it and put it down.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Here it comes.
And also, go ahead.
There it is.
There's the poetry too by John Trudell that gives a, an artful.
Well, I've been listening to him. He's got all these albums on YouTube, and he's got the music, he's got the drums going, and then he's just like, living in reality and just boom, boom, boom. I mean, the dude is just, I mean, he literally is a channel. That's all he is. He's a radio.
Yeah.
He receives a signal from a distance, okay? And he receives the signal from a distance that's invisible, and then he transmits it. Because his body, our bodies are literally designed.
He's the voice of
that.
Yeah, he's the voice of the ancestors. And you know what? He's also he can be considered Chicano because his maternal side comes from Mexico. There's a documentary. There's a documentary. Just look it up on YouTube. Trudell, the documentary. It's really good.
This dude is just.
It's a good one.
Is heavy. I mean, just knowing, because I read In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, and that is an excellent book. It's the whole trial in a very analytical way. It breaks down the entire transcript of the trial of Leonard Peltier and all the people that were in AIM. And it's just an amazing piece of material, because they're like, when you want to talk about like self-determination, these are men that know. I really don't care what you say to me. You could say it and I will listen. In fact, I need to, because I need to know the level of your insanity and your ignorance. Okay, so please keep talking. But they make no, their whole identity and the way that they're moving through space and time is not subject to an authority. It is subject to their ancestral responsibility, because they know and understand that their bodies are simply just channels. They submit their body to that realm, and in that process, they don't live or function selfishly or self-centeredly or with any kind of a motive or agenda. It's simply, how do I position myself best to be a channel and a vessel by which the ancestors speak? That's it.
Right.
And
I mean, thank you for that palabra, because, you know, a lot of our hermanas, hermanos, siblings, we do that work, and we connect with spirit, and it's a real journey to learn that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking the time, all of you, to share resources in which we can continue to learn together, right, as a community, as a people, so that we can rise up together and, again, not just survive but flourish, right, and honor the beautiful beauty of who we are, right. So is there a closing palabra, Dr. Samaripa Kiawit, so we can go ahead and close up and get back to our families?
I was hoping Dr. Samaripa will have the closing word on his show, and your show, hermana. Thank you all so much. Thank you for having us. I want to thank all of you, all the participants here. Thank you, Shirley, for that confirmation that, you know, when we're all trying to find a way, and yes, nobody has the one that nobody can answer any $1 million questions. Nobody has the right answer, because the reality is that nothing is under control, and we're all trying to find the way, you know, and we're just putting at its most basic level, where if I look at you and you look at me and we recognize each other as family, Native Americans, that's all we have to do. And if we can come together on that alone, the rest will fall into place. There's no reason for us to be in a competition for correctness or looking for the proper term. Native American itself is not the correct term, but we're trying to be strategic in a 500+ information and propaganda war against our minds. You know, we don't want to leave room for debate, because you cannot debate with the word Native American. And we've had these discussions with people who attack us on a repeated basis. That's a colonial term, yes, but we're being strategic. Well, we prefer the word indigenous. I was like, indigenous to where? That can be used against you, because anybody can be indigenous to any given part of the world. We're trying to be, if you're going to get on your soapbox and you're going to present yourself to billions of people, millions of people from around the world, you're going to get up and you're going to say, like, for instance, my name is Paul Soto, I'm Kumeyaay, from Native American from the Kumeyaay Nation. In less than 5 seconds, you told millions of people who you are, who your people are, and what land they are from, because people around the world know, oh, Native America, the Western Hemisphere, he's American Indian, that's it. Instead of, I'm indigenous, and like, indigenous to where? You look like some of us from here, from there, whatever. It's all about strategy. Everybody's trying to flex their intellectual muscles, trying to be correct, politically correct, inclusive. Native American is all inclusive. Let's get with it, you know. And this is not for you. I'm just saying in general to the people out there. The reason that we can't get anywhere, and the white people are, I mean, not all white people, but I'm saying, like, the invaders are laughing at us as they cash in on our resources, because they're watching us argue, they're watching us fight, laughing at us because we're running around in the dark looking for that out when it's inside us. And that's why they need to distract us on the outside constantly They need to attack us from the outside so we don't listen and go inside and know who we are. And like Brother Paul said, find the right position to be that antenna, to be the transmission, for the spirit, for the ancestors, our personal guardians, who, however you want to identify them, and the land itself, because everything is living, being, moving. What is your connection? That's what it comes down to, and it comes to like, what kind of world are we going to give? What are we going to give our children? What are we putting them in? Are we going to submit them to continued slavery? Is that what we want to see from our own bloodlines generations from now? Look at them and see like, well, at least they're alive. It's like the time has come. Colonization can't last forever. Once you open the book and you read it, you cannot forget what you read. You cannot forget what you know. You cannot undo it. So the best thing, and also it's like they want us to fight them on their terms. They want us to attack them on their terms. They brought us down to their level to fight them. That didn't work. So we have to outthink them, and we have to outsmart them back on our level. And I think that's why we push for identity reclamation, because identity reclamation leads to land reclamation. Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know you're Native American, you're from your ancestors here, this continent, you're never going to come around to fighting for this land and the resources. You're not going to care about the land and that they rip up and they rape and the people that they kill and murder so that you can keep putting gasoline in your car. That's the sad truth, because everything in their reality is connected to the murder of our own people and the destruction of our continent and even the world. So once we make that connection, we can, like John Trudell said it best, because our population is the giant that's awakening. We're the majority on this entire continent. It's not two continents. It's a single landmass. 67% of the entire population. We can crush them with one hand, but that's not the way, because that's what they want. They have the guns. They have the means.
Right.
We have to outsmart them and outthink them. Now, the plan is, before I don't want to throw myself off track here, but is using strategy and having children that are awakened, because it's going to happen. It's not going to last forever, and they know this, so we just have to walk carefully and not fall into the traps that they're trying to set before us, whatever they may be, because they don't want this. They're not going to let go of this willingly and say, okay, we give up. It's time to just give it back. We're sorry. That's not going to happen. And if it does, it's going to be later on when they're a very much more of a tiny minority. So we just have to know that we're not a minority. We're not insignificant. We are not mixed, whatever. We're not nobodies. We got to stop being confused and remember who we are. We are the power. We have the power. We're part of the greater power of all living beings. And obviously we're still here, because if we weren't here, there would be no corn tortillas. There would be no nopales being sold in the stores. There would be no, tamales in one form or another. Our native foods survive because we were able to survive. And that should be, how much more basic can we get? How much more, And I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for allowing us here on your platform and allowing us to be a part of this conversation with all of you. I think somebody wants to say bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Sebas.
Papa.
Bye.
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 Get your mommy to put some chocolate in your lechita, okay?
Oh, you're gonna get him in trouble.
Mrs. Tamaripa, how would I get a hold of you? I can send you like an email or something, because I need more. I don't get this here in San Jose. There's nothing like this here. I mean, nothing, dude.
Yeah, but we'll put you on the email list, hermano.
All right. Yeah, because
because
I need to process like some things that are going on. I'm dude, there's a statue here that I was able to successfully rally the entire community around. I got educators from Stanford, from Santa Clara University, all the universities around here, was able to successfully get a statue removed that was the symbol of, that symbolized the Americans placing the American flag here in San Jose, July 14th, 1846. Okay, that was the onset, that was the beginning of the Mexican-American War. They established it here in San Jose. Okay, that statue's gone now because I go to city council meetings for 30 hours a week. I'm in the fight for 30 hours a week. I've been doing it for 3 years. I need some, I need
You
like,
need to replenish. You need
yes,
keep that
yeah.
balance. That's a lot of output, a lot of effort. You need
Yes.
something coming back. That's the only way we win the long war, because we can't burn out. We need to stay connected.
Well, that's
I
what's
didn't mean to
happening.
interrupt you, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And so like
Yeah, all of us in this work.
Yeah, but the immigrants here don't understand that, dude, I just got removed a symbol that gave you your psychology as an immigrant in the land of your ancestors. Because that flag being settled here is what led to the border. That border led to your identity as a Mexican immigrant in the land of your ancestors. I get no support from them. Absolutely none. Zero. Nothing. Because I'm Chicano. And so I don't know how to deal with that. I mean, I am completely marginalized from this community because they speak Spanish and I don't. And I don't speak Spanish because my mother was literally traumatized inside the school system. They were beating them. They were humiliated, exactly on par with those Catholic schools. It's exactly what happened to my mother. So in my home, oh no, you are not speaking Spanish in my house. The only time Spanish was spoken is when my grandmother was there or she was cussing me out. That's it. And so
that is true for a lot of us. Thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of us were disconnected from that language, and so we have trouble making those bridges with first, second generation. Well, again, we talked about the word immigrant and how that's damaging, but recent people that are migrating throughout our continent, right? So you need to be supported. We all need to be supported when we're doing this work. We need places where we can put the armor down and not be attacked for honoring who we are, for reconnecting. And we have a lot of workshops that you can go to that can support you, or just listen, share your palabra. A lot of people are doing this work, that are trying to help us manage our wellness and our well-being, so that we can be well enough to continue these fights for the light, for familia, for togetherness. I also want to thank everybody for being here, for sharing your voice. Those who are gonna talk, those who are gonna listen. Thank you, Paul, for your palabra. Thank you, Thais. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Claudia, Kiawi, Manuel, all of us who are in this reconnecting and figuring out and deciding, what we're gonna honor, what we're gonna bring forward, what we're gonna lead with towards our wellness and our well-being, especially. And I want to thank, too, my ancestors and the, guardians of these sacred places where each of us are. I want to honor each of your homes, each of your hearts, and our heart too. And I speak always as a mommy. I always speak first as a mother, and I do this work, as a mother, for our children, for all of our children. I always say, all these children, there are my children. And I'm going to continue to move forward and do this work for our children, and to heal is in my part, right? The intergenerational traumas, so that we can flourish instead of just survive. So I want to leave my palabra with that thank you from myself and from the Institute of Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx Psychology. And just bring that love, that heart, as a mother, as I connect with our Madre Tierra, right? I want to connect my heart with all of your hearts, and give that gratitude and that thank you, right? that we do this work and that we lovingly support where we are, not judging, not trying to out academic, out, out know each other, the Olympics of oppression, none of that. We are just sharing our palabras, trying to unite, come together, be strong for our children, be strong for ourselves. And I want to, yeah, we're not trying to be right. We're just trying to have the conversations, right? As we're on this journey, like Shirley said, trying to figure out, where we're at and what we can do from this point. So that is my closing palabra. And I know Dr. Samaripa, I want to honor you as my dualidad. Thank you for your work and for your fatherhood, right? As we honor the women as the mothers, we honor the men too as the fathers, right? So that the men can heal too and do well in that healing for our children and for your partners, right? We were just on a show with Oya Hombre where we talked about that men healing, so that the men can add to the wellness, right, for themselves and as the women as well, and all our siblings, whatever genders, right? And we honor all people. We honor our African American siblings. We honor all our Native peoples. We honor the people, and we want to. I want to express that gratitude. Dr. Samaripa, I know you wanted to give your closing palabra, and then we will be done for the day. What do? We did 45 minutes so far over.
Hijo, man, you can't put us together anywhere. We always go over time. But it's because, as you say, Sotiani, I think it's again a symbol of us not having in this world a space for our voice. So that when we come together, man, we keep going, and we have so many things to say. But thank you for you holding this plática and moderating for us. And I honor you as my dualidad as well in the road that we have together, in the battles and the joys, and my hermano Kiawi with his family too, that also made time for him to be here as well. Again, thank you for your palabra, and all of us that are here. I saw some people also chiming in on Facebook: Elia, Evelyn, Anjali, Francisco, Peter Barbosa, always with us. Thank you all for your comments on the Facebook page. And just, we're all doing this again, as we're all saying together. It's important that we do this. No one's going to do it for us. We have all the opposition against us to block us from connecting to our identity and to our community. So, but those obstacles can be real, but they're also false. They're illusions. If we hold to the truth about who we are, and we continue to do this work together. Yeah, not try to outbid each other, but do it together. And coming together in a circle means that we come with different, ideas and thoughts, but we are a people, we are a community. If we say we are, and we come together and we act as one, then we are one. So thank you for this, plática, everybody, for this discussion. Yes, we have part 1 and part 2 on our Facebook page. I think we have them posted also on our razapsychology.org. And I invite everyone here to definitely check out Brown Continent. Our hermano Kiawi is connected with that group as well, that is bringing awareness, bringing up so much good information about who we are and how to unmask all of these kind of false images of ourselves. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Mati, everybody. Thank you.
Gracias,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, have a good day.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Thais. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Sebas.